Hello class, welcome to week 3. Again, I'm apologizing for the lateness of this video. Like I said earlier in the week, I kind of had a bout of illness last weekend and that carried over into the beginning part of this week. So, again, I'm sorry. Starting off with assignment 3, I have extended the deadline of assignment 3 because this video is late and I was late posting it. So you will have until next Wednesday at midnight to get assignment 3 in. However, we are going to start on week 4 on this coming Monday. So, I'll be posting another video lecture hopefully much earlier in the week, next week, and we'll be starting to talk about week 4 topics at the beginning of that week. I do also want to make sure you guys know that week 3 discussions are still due Sunday at midnight. I was just looking at the discussion board and noticed that nobody had posted yet, so hopefully this video will spark some ideas for discussion posts and we can get those done. So this week we are concentrating on methods, and methods are simply a grouping of C# statements that do something. And the reason why you use methods is because if we just did everything in one straight big long code line, it would be a nightmare. You would have to rewrite things a whole bunch of times. There'd be no organization, and it'd be very, very hard to understand and focus on any given part of the application. Methods really are why modern programming languages have come about. Back in the old days, back in the 80s and even the 70s and earlier, code was very linear. You just basically wrote code, you did a straight line, you did everything that you needed to right there, and there was almost no organization, and it led to massive problems. So when you think about a method, think about just a grouping of statements that accept some parameters and potentially return a parameter. So the way we declare a method is the very first thing we have to do is we have to tell it what our method is going to be returning. So if we want to return a number, let's say an integer, we would start by declaring an int. And now I want to point out that you'll notice that I am still within the class brackets here. So you can see I'm within these two sets of brackets, but I am outside of the main brackets. The reason for that is main is nothing more than a method. It's a special method, a static void method that is going to be the first thing that the program looks at, but it is still just a method. So outside of the main methods brackets and inside the class brackets, we are going to declare our method. So we're going to say our method is going to be returning a integer value. The next thing we need to do is give our method a name. So I'm just going to call this one my method. And then we need to do an open parenthesis. And the next portion, we're going to tell the method what values we want to transfer into the method. You can just close the parentheses and not accept any parameters into your method. Or you can declare, I want to take an int, and you have to give it, it's just like declaring a variable, so you want to give it a name. So I'm going to say my param, and then you close the brackets, or close the parentheses, sorry. And you'll notice I've got a little squiggly line here saying that it's expecting a semicolon. Well, we're not going to put a semicolon in there, because if we put a semicolon in there, our method's not going to do anything. We actually need to put some code in with this method. So I'm going to go to a new line, and I'm going to put in one of the curly brackets, and then put an ending curly bracket in. And now it's giving us another error. It's saying that the method does not return code, or does not return a value on all path. So when you first create a method, Visual Studio is always going to give you an error there. Just ignore it for now. So what we have with the method that we've created, we've said we are going to be returning an integer value, we've named it, and then we said we are going to take a parameter in. So let's give this a name. Let's actually make this do something. Let's say we want to find the square root with this method. Now actually there is a built-in to .NET method for doing the square root, but for now just humor me that that's what we're going to do. So determining the square root, very easy. We just multiply my parameter by itself and then we return that value. So we would just create an integer value, and I'm just going to say call it return value. Then we're going to set return value equal to my param times my param. And then the last thing that we need to do is we need to return that. So every method that returns a value has to have what's called a return statement. And you do that simply by typing the keyword return and then what variable you want to return. So we are going to return value. And now you'll see Visual Studio is now happy. We don't have that red squiggly line up here anymore, and we have our method where we are returning an integer value. We've called our method square root. We are accepting an integer value of my parameter. We are creating a new variable within this method called return value, and then I'm setting return value equal to my parameter times my parameter, and then I'm returning that value. So you'll see if we write a little bit of quick code here, we'll just do a console dot, actually take that back, let's go ahead and talk about how we actually use this code now. So calling this method up in the code, let's just create a variable, an integer value variable, and we're going to call it my square num. We're going to set that value equal to 5. Now let's say for some reason we wanted to return the square root of 5 to the console, or we wanted to return it to a new variable. So let's declare another variable up here, int, and we'll call it the square root of my square num. So if I want to use this code that I've created in the method to return the square root of 5, all I have to do now is say where I want to put it. So square, we're going to declare the variable that I want to put it in, square root of my num, equals, and then we just start calling that method. So we're going to say sqr root, and it's going to give me an error here in just a minute, my square num. And this is almost valid code. It is giving us an error here, and the reason for that is because I'm using a console program to do this. I am just going to add a keyword here, and what this is doing is it's saying inside a static method you can't call another non-static method. So that's what that error message is. Just ignore that for right now. We will get to that in a minute. So I have written my method here, and then I am calling my method right here, square root. I'm passing it in the value of my square num, which I declared up here as 5, and I'm saving that value in this square root of my square num. So, okay, so we've done that. Let's write a console.write, and we're going to write the square, that variable, and then we're going to do a console.read deposit. Let's debug that and see what happens. And boom, we've got the square root of 5. 5 times 5 is 25. So you can see that our code is returning a valid variable. So now let's go back and talk about this keyword static that I had to put in here. Static is a modifier to our code, and what this keyword means is that when the compiler picks up this code and makes it into a program and allows you to execute it, it's only going to create one version of it. It's going to compile it once and it's done. It's static. It's staying in memory like that. At this level, in what we've already done in C#, you're probably scratching your head going, well, I don't get that. Why would you ever not have that? And next week, when we start talking about classes and we really get into the object-oriented part of C# and start talking about object-oriented programming, this will become more apparent. But for now, just accept that when you use the keyword static, and you have to use the keyword static when you're writing a console application with the main method, you can only call static methods within this method. And the only other way to do that would be to create an object and start calling code with that. And like I said, we will get into that a little bit more in week 4 and start talking about how that happens. Now, another thing to note is that there are other access modifiers that you can add to your method when you create it. The most common ones that you'll see are public and private. And what they do is they say where those methods are able to be accessed in, when we start talking about classes, and again, object-oriented. I can make this a public static method. And basically what we're saying here is that since this is a public method, anybody, anywhere in the code can access this method. If I were to initialize this as private instead of public, what that would mean is that only people within this class program can access this method. In fact, you don't even see it outside of this class. So there are also other ones. Protected is another type, and when we start going into, I take that back. I don't even think we'll get into that protected in this class. That may be in CINS 229, the advanced C# programming class, that we get into protected. There's also things internal, virtual, abstract. There's quite a few different modifiers that you can put in front of this that do different things. But for now, just concentrate on public, private, and static. Those are really the only modifiers you need to worry about. Now, both public and private can be used at the same time as static, but you can't use public, private at the same time. If I try to do that, yep, see, Visual Studio says, hey, there's more than one protection modifier. You can't do that, and it gives us the error, so we'll just delete that. We'll also go ahead and delete this keyword private here because we don't need that. So there's another special keyword that we need to talk about when talking about methods, and that is the keyword void. And what void means is that you are not going to be returning any values within the method. So if I declare a void method, and let's do a static void my method, what this particular type of method means, you'll notice, okay, we've got the static, both that's the same. Here in this one, we're saying we're returning an integer value of the square root. In the lower one, we say void. What that means is we're not returning any value. So when you call this program, it's never going to expect any return value coming back from that method. So we could put something in here that doesn't really return a value. We could do a console dot write line hello. And what this will do is it will return the string hello to the console. So if I were to go up here in my main method, and let's say before I write the square root of 5, I call my method. So you'll see I didn't actually set any variables equal to that. I just said my method and then put the 2 parentheses. You'll also note the different thing that I did down here is I didn't add any parameters to this method. So I'm not actually passing any values in. I'm just running the method. And basically all that does is take this snippet of code right here and insert it right here into the application. So when I run a debug, you'll see it displays hello, and then it does the right line of 25. So it does the square root calculation underneath that. Void methods are very handy for when you have a section of code that you're going to write over and over and over and over again. You can see if I just copy this and I'm just going to paste, 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 run the debug, you'll see it runs that every single time. So when you have a large section of code that you're going to use over and over and over and over and over again, throw it inside a method, and that way every time you use that, you just have to run that method. You don't have to keep typing that code over and over and over again. Okay, so now that we've gone over the basics of methods, let's go a little bit more in depth into parameters and how you can pass different information into a method. Let me just clean up some stuff here, give us a little bit of space. So let's create a new method, and it's going to be a static. Let's return an integer value, and we're going to call this my multiply. And we're going to pass multiple values into this statement. So if I wanted to insert 2 numbers to multiply together, I can create a variable called int, and we're going to do first num for the name, and then I can create another one called int second num. You'll notice that I separated those with a comma. You can continue to separate those with commas. You can do that as many times as you want, and it will send those variables into the method. So, and you'll notice we got our error message again. I'm sorry, it trips me up every time I see that. It annoys me that it's saying, okay, you haven't done a return value yet. Yeah, I know, I haven't done it. I'm getting there. Sometimes Visual Studio just gets ahead of you. So we're sending all 3 of those variables into this method. Your book talks about a couple of different keywords that you can put in front of these to pass variables in. In this instance, where we just have integer, where we're declaring the variable using the type and then the name, so integer first num, we're doing what's called a pass by value, which means that we're actually creating a new variable with this name, and we're taking whatever value was passed into it and saving that variable. And this is probably the most common way of using parameters inside a method. However, there are going to be times when you're going to be passing very, very large objects or sets of data that you don't necessarily want to pass the value of, that you want to do what's called a reference parameter. And to do a reference parameter, you simply need to use the keyword ref. So in this example, if I wanted to pass the keyword or pass first num as a reference, I can say ref int first num. So we have the modifier first, then we have the type, and then we have the name declared. And what's going to happen is instead of actually creating a new variable with this name, and let's say we pass this number into it, so we pass 5 in here, instead of creating a new variable called first num and setting its value equal to 5, it's actually going to use this variable right here. And that's important because any changes we make to this parameter inside this method will also make that change here. So let's go ahead and run this up here in our code. Let's make it do something first. Okay, I went ahead and paused the video for a second while I typed out some code, so your screen should have just flashed. Alright, so we have the method myMultiply. We're passing a reference to first num into it, the value of second num, and the value of third num. And then we're creating a new integer variable called retval, which is my shortcut for return value, equals the first number times the second number times the third number. Then we're setting the value of first num, which we declared up here, equal to 0, the second num equal to 0, and the third num equals to 0. Then we're returning the multiplied value. So this should equal 100 when we do the math, and return that value back. Up here you can see I declared my first num variable inside the main method, my sec num and my third num. And then I'm doing a console.writeLine and I'm doing myMultiply. I'm passing a reference to my first num. You'll note that I had to use the keyword ref here when I passed it in because we are passing a reference to a variable, not the value of a variable. And then I'm passing it the second number and the third number. So this console.writeLine should write the result of this method here. And then I'm also going to write the result of, I'm going to say what is the first number now, what is the second number now, and what is the third number now. So when I run this, you'll see that we returned the answer to that problem, 5 times 2 times 10, that equals 100. And you'll notice my first number is now equal to 0. And that's because we passed a reference to this variable right here. So when we did that, and we set that number equal to 0 down here, it not only set this variable here equal to 0, but it also sets this variable up here equal to 0. So you'll notice the other two are untouched. So even though I changed their value down here to 0 as well, because I didn't pass them in by reference, I passed them by value, the value of these variables stays the same up here. They're not touched. And that's where passing by reference comes in handy. There is also another keyword that you can use here, and that is an out parameter. If we were to change one of these to out, what it would do is it would set the output of that variable to, or the output of that parameter to whatever we change it to inside of the method. Okay, again, I paused the video to do some coding, so you didn't have to stand there and watch me do that. So what I've done is I've added another variable to the myMultiply method, and it is an output variable. So I have the keyword out, it's an integer, and it's answer. Inside the method, I'm setting answer equal to first number times second number times third number. And then you can see down here I'm still setting them to 0. Up here in the code, I've declared a new variable called myAnswer, and I'm not initializing that variable. I am just declaring it up here. I run the method myMultiply, pass by reference the first number, pass by value the second number, and by value the third number, and then I'm setting an output from this method to my answer. And what's going to happen when I run this is you can see that first line is still 100, and here I'm doing the console.writeLine my answer, so that should be 100. So what happens is when it runs through the code, it's basically doing the same thing as a pass by reference here, except you're never actually passing it you're passing it an empty variable. So I'm setting a reference point in here for the output parameter to my answer, and it knows to just take answer from here and pop it into this variable up here because of that output parameter. And you can see the other variables act the same way. And the last topic that we have to talk about tonight are optional parameters. So also, in these parameters that you're passing into the variable, you can set default values for a parameter. So let's say we want to come here and we wanted to add a fourth number to do a multiplication. So we're going to do fourth num. If we want to make this what's called an optional parameter, all we have to do is set this equal to a number. So if I set that equal to 10, if the user who calls this method doesn't specify fourth number, it will automatically assume 10. Now you'll see up here, this went red squiggly line for a minute before I put in the equals 10. So let me just go ahead and pop that out there. So you'll see, there we go. It's going to give us this error message saying no overload method for my multiply. That takes 4 arguments. So it's saying that there are no my multiply methods that only take 4 parameters. That doesn't work. So once we put that equals 10 in there, let's go ahead and add that to our chain of numbers that we multiply by. And we'll go ahead and run that. You can see our return value changed to 1,000 because it multiplied 100 times 10, giving us 1,000. Something to note about optional parameters, they need to go at the end of the string. And you can put more than one optional parameter in here. So if I put a fifth num equals 5 in there, you can see Visual Studio is not going to scream at us. It's not saying that we have any errors, and we can do times, oh, well, not really fifth, but fifth number, whatever you pronounce that. I know I mistyped it. We'll go ahead and run it, and you'll see we've got 5,000 now. We can go ahead and come up here, and we can actually declare that. You'll see what the IntelliSense came up with. Notice how it's got the fourth number and fifth number in brackets, and it's telling you that those are optionally set to those numbers already. It's telling you what the default value is if you don't put anything in there. If I put a 2 in there, you can see when we run it, our number changes. Now it's back to only 1,000 because it did the 5 times 2 times 10 times 2 times 5. Which gets us to 1,000. And then if we want to, we can also put in a declaration for that fifth number as well, and we'll get yet another number. Boom, 400. So that's how optional parameters work. This is something that you need to know about, but it's not something that you're really going to use in early entry-level programming. Optional parameters usually come down the road a ways, so don't worry too much about them. If you don't quite understand that concept, it's okay. We'll come back to it. We'll revisit it later in the year. Okay, just double-checked my notes, and those are the only topics that I wanted to cover in this video. This should be a fairly short one in comparison to some of the other ones. Again, the assignment this week, fairly easy. You just have to create a program with 2 different methods in it. Go ahead and review the assignment that's posted on Blackboard and get started on that. You should have everything that you need to get that done. Email me if you have any questions. Other than that, I will talk to you folks next week.